All right, so their question is, what's the meaning of these particular parables of fasting, wedding feast, old cloth, and the new wineskin? All right, let's begin to read part of their answer. I don't know how much of this we'll read tonight, but we won't finish it. We might finish it, we might not, but if not, we'll pick it up next week. Here's part of their answer. These parables found in, and they say found in Mark 2:18 through 22. We already know it's found in Matthew 9:14 through 17, and it's also found in the book of Luke, but I don't have the exact reference off the top of my head. But so just those three, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. As far as I can tell, it is not found in the book of John. So they talk about the one in Mark. They say these parables found in Mark begin with a statement that the Pharisees and the disciples of John the Baptist were fasting. Again, if you compare to all three stories, there's some minor differences between one story versus the other. Like in one version, it's the Pharisees that are included, like in Mark. But I think in Matthew, it's not the Pharisees' question, it's John's disciples, etc., etc. I'm not going to touch on those minor differences. I just want to catch the general gist of the sense of Yeshua's statements about the three anecdotal answers that he supplies. They go on to say, this is GotQuestions.org, the twice weekly fast was a tradition adopted by the legalistic Pharisees at the time, even though the Mosaic Law prescribed only one fast on the Day of Atonement. And you can reference Leviticus 16, 29 and 31 for that. Interesting that GotQuestions.org recognizes that fasting was not a commandment of the Torah. That's true, except for the Day of Atonement, which had already become a tradition to fast. So the GotQuestions didn't say this, but actually in Leviticus, we could say that God commanded Israel to fast on the Day of Atonement, but that's simply an interpretation of the word afflict your souls, the phrase that we translate into English, afflict your souls, on this particular day. It had become interpreted that this phrase, afflict your souls, meant fasting, but there are other ways to interpret the passage. It could mean some other kind of affliction. It doesn't have to mean affliction in terms of diet or food, restraining yourself or causing some form of discomfort to yourself on this particular day in accordance with God's commands. But that's beside the point. It's a minor point that I'm not going to get into at the moment. Germane to our study is that it had already become a tradition among the Jewish people by Yeshua's day that fasting was something that was done at least by the sect of the Pharisees twice a week, and this actually later on influenced many Christians as they sought to distance themselves from Judaism as a failed religion earlier on, right? First, second, third, and fourth, coming to a head like in the 4th centuries with our whole councils where we decide, okay, we're not going to be mistaken as Jews, but something that helped to very early on distinguish or differentiate Christianity as a religion from Judaism as a religion was their fast days. And as we read in the document known as the Didache, which is translated basically as the teaching, it's a very early, I think it's 1st century document that is available. It was historically preserved. It's not a scripturally what we say canonized form of document, right? So it's not something that would show up in any Bible, but you can do Google search for it. Didache, I believe it's spelling in the English. Didache, Dida, Didache, yeah, Didache. And in that document, it outlines the fact that the Christians had begun fasting on different days than the Pharisees in order to not be mistaken as Jews, right? And I think it even talks about that. Maybe I'll bring that up next week. I'll pull that reference and show you. But that lends some more support to this idea that very early on, with interpretation of what Jesus was bringing to the people was something entirely new, making a break from the old. So GotQuestions continues. They say, some people came to Jesus and asked him why his disciples did not fast like the Pharisees and those of John's disciples who had remained loyal to the Pharisaic traditions, right? So those are just details from the text that we would pick up if we were to read all three texts side by side. Now, Jesus' response is given in 3 short parables. All right, so let's continue reading GotQuestions.org. The first one, they say, is a parable of a bridegroom with his groomsmen at a wedding feast. Jesus' point is that fasting during the wedding feast is pointless. I don't need to stop and explain most of this. It's self-explanatory, so I'll just keep reading their answer.